Hello everyone, welcome back to Believers IS Academy. In this today's discussion, we will be discussing about the UPSC Prelims 2026 and most specifically the economy section of the UPSC Prelims 2026. And generally speaking about Prelims 2026, one thing is evident that the paper which was set was considered to be one of the most difficult paper which was set by UPSC so far in the history after the 2023. However, compared to the 2023, the most difficult paper that was set by UPSC, this paper is considered to be more absurd, and I would say this was also more ambiguous considering the kind of questions which was asked. Right, it is not the kind of way the questions was asked, but it was directly with respect to the kind of questions which made the exam difficult, not because of the conceptual difficulty, but mostly because the questions were absurd. However, for economy this time, I would say the questions were inclined mostly towards the conventional way. In fact, the questions came mostly from the key areas, as we have already seen few questions, but slightly we can see that UPSC has inclined, or let's say showed interest more towards the current affairs this year, especially from the economy. However, there are few set of questions which can be categorized both as current affairs and also part of economy. So we will be discussing few questions which pretty much seems like an economy question, and we'll start with the first question. In what ways does the Willingham International Seaport represent a structural shift in India's maritime trade and logistics policy? In fact, it was one of the most important seaport which kind of gave global prominence. In fact, opening India to the global, maritime in terms of the ports, and also reducing India's dependency on other foreign ports, especially the Colombo port and all of those things. It was pretty much in use, and it is not a shocker that UPSC asked this. However, we'll see the options. Well, the first option is by functioning exclusively as a domestic cargo hub to reduce reliance on coastal shipping and eliminate the need for foreign collaborations. And second option is by focusing primarily on passenger cruise tourism and heritage shipping to increase Kerala's profile as a maritime heritage destination. Third option, by leveraging its natural deep draft and strategic location to reduce dependence on foreign transshipment ports to enhance revenue retention and reposition India in regional maritime trade. So the correct answer is 3. Of course, all of these things, three options pretty much seem similar. But however, the third option is the most relevant because it not only leverages India's position in fact, to reduce the dependence on the foreign transshipment, but also most importantly, it repositioned India in the regional maritime trade as well. So third option here is correct. Next question, which of the following are the most significant implications of obtaining Oco-Tex certification for Eri silk in the global textile industry? So this was also kind of a question which either people, if they have already covered, they would have pretty much be able to solve it. If not, no. Well, however, let's look at the options. It allows Indian exporters to compete in high-end markets that prioritize chemical-free products. Well, this is also the correct statement. And second statement, it confirms that Eri silk meets international safety, environmental and quality standards, enabling its entry into the premium eco-conscious markets. So the answer here is both 1 and 2. And moving to the next question, 35th one. In fact, this was the question where UPSC has kind of changed the way, or the type of questions, or the way they have framed the question has been completely changed. In fact, this is a thinker. Well, let's look at the question. Consider the following statements with reference to Sagarmala program. In fact, Sagarmala program was pretty much in use. In fact, in the year 2025, it completed 10 years of its launch, so it was a very important program. Well, the option goes, the Sagarmala program seeks to achieve port-led economic growth through cost-effective and sustainable coastal infrastructure. Well, yes, the answer seems to be correct. In fact, the statement is correct. Second is, the success of the Sagarmala program is reflected in significant growth in coastal and inland waterway shipping, along with improved global port rankings. That is also correct. Well, third option, Sagarmala 2.0 aims to position India as a global maritime innovation hub aligned with Atmanirbhar Bharat and the Viksit Bharat 2047. So this is also pretty much correct. So now look at the option. So the question doesn't end here. The option goes, which of the following relationships among the above statements is or correct? So this is a bouncer that UPSC has put on aspirants. In fact, all of the aspirants, that they not only have to worry about picking the right option, but also have to focus more on considering the relationship that is with respect to these options here. Well, the first statement goes that the statement 2 validates the effectiveness of the strategies envisioned in statement 1, means whatever the statement 2 states, it is validating the effectiveness of the statement 1, right? Is that so? The answer is yes. And second is, statement 3 extends the objectives of the statement 1 by embedding them into a future oriented innovation framework. Well, that is also correct, because option 3 talks about the Viksit Bharat 2047, and obviously it extends the future oriented innovation framework of the Sagarmala program. So even that is also correct. Now, third statement here, it says statement 1 contradicts statement 3 by focusing only on traditional infrastructure instead of modern. So the first statement, we cannot see that it is only talking about, or it is contradicting the futuristic plan of statement 3. So in fact, third statement will be right. The answer is B, which is 1 and 2. So next question, an e-commerce revenue model where the seller has control over pricing but does not keep products in stock and instead transfer customer orders and shipment details to a third party supplier who then ships the goods directly to the consumer is called what kind of a model? So in fact, this pretty much is like, it came from out of the blue, like pretty much like a very unexpected question. And I would say this was also a pretty random question. Either you knew the answer or you did not know the answer, right? And I feel this is pretty much inclined towards the present market standards of e-commerce, and we have time and again come across this word affiliate marketing, right? So affiliate revenue model or affiliate marketing is what we have oftenly seen or oftenly heard. So basically pretty much this question is also random but also mostly current linked. Well, the answer for this particular question is drop shipping model. 88th question, which one of the following correctly represents three key sub-indices of the Financial Inclusion Index of the Reserve Bank of India? This was also a question which was most expected from the Reserve Bank of India topic, but not so much in detail. Well, the answer here is three, which is access, usage, and quality. Of course, the first, even through elimination method, people could have actually derived, the answer. Why? Because here, when we are talking about three key sub-indices of Financial Inclusion Index, when it talks about credit access, insurance depth, and pension coverage, this pretty much narrows down the reach of this particular index. So obviously, to some extent, you can say that it is not the right statement. Then talking about the second option, banking access, GDP contribution. See, GDP contribution, GDP figures, it is a macroeconomic variable, right? So macroeconomic agent that is. So that is also, obviously not part of RBI's index. It cannot be. And then probably, the option, or let's say the student could have come to a point where they might be 50-50 doubtful about these two particular options. But however, this was a pretty doable question with, the third option being the correct, because, ultimately here it talks about access, usage, and also quality. Here it is also talking about access, affordability, and transparency, which quite is vague, and it quite subsumes almost everything. But this more or less talks about the functions of the RBI, right? So that is the reason why people, if they had to go based on guessing, they could have gone here. And well, however, the correct answer is C here. So the next question, which one of the following best describes the objective of the ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce? So this was also very much in news. It was launched in 2022 under DPIIT and Ministry of Commerce. This is also very important, pretty much like how we have UPI. So all of these online e-commerce, they have ONDC as their UPI platform. So the option here is C, to break the dominance of large e-commerce platforms by enabling interoperability across networks. So pretty much like how we use UPI for transactions through various platforms. So this ONDC Open Network for Digital Commerce is pretty much acting like the UPA for the e-commerce platform. So the answer here is C. Even this was also a pretty direct question, and we have constantly studied about this, especially during the e-commerce lecture and all of those things. Next is, which one of the following statements about the UPI and CBDC, right, the central bank digital currency, is not correct? So this is also one of the most expected questions, most expected theme. Even in our classes, we have mentioned about the importance of these two concepts, the UPI and the CBDC, and even these were part of the PYQs as well. Well, the answer here is D, because in both cases, UPI and digital rupee, the liability lies with the users and their respective banks. So the question here is not about finding the right answer. It is about finding the wrong statement. Because see, first statement, UPSC is a real-time payment system, but digital rupee is akin to sovereign currency paper. So this is a correct statement, and obviously it cannot be an answer. Second statement, if you see, in case of UPI, settlement for end users happens instantly as the money gets immediately debited or credited. It's correct. But in case of digital rupee, there is no settlement as the wallet balance gets transferred to another wallet. This is also a correct statement, because the question is asking you to find out the wrong statement. Third, UPI transactions are recorded by banks and reflected in bank statements. But in case of digital rupee, no data is captured in bank statements as transactions are from one wallet to another. Even this is also correct. Now you are left with option D. However, we will just, even if you want to go through, it says in both the cases, UPI and digital rupee, the liability lies with the users and their respective banks. So it is the case with UPI, but not with the case of digital rupee or with the CBDC, right? So that is the simple answer. So it was a very simple question, could have answered. Next is with respect to money chapter, real world assets tokenization are correct. Which of the statements are correct? So now, what is real world assets tokenization? Well, real world asset tokenization is the process of creating the digital representation. It is a process of creating the digital representation of a physical financial asset. Like now you might have a real estate, right? Or let's say you might have certain bonds, certain commodities. So now converting or creating a digital representation of all of these physical financial assets on a blockchain or a distributed ledger is what is called as the real world or RWA tokenization. So which of the following statements are correct? So well, the answer is A, 1, 2 and 3, which means all the three statements are correct. Well, let's look at the options as well. Tokenization is the process of turning real world assets into a digital tokens using blockchain technology. Absolutely correct. Tokenization of real world assets offers 24/7 access, promoting financial inclusion. That is also true. Tokenization of real world assets will allow the access to high growth investment opportunities for individuals in India. This is also correct. So the answer here is all of the above. And this was also an easy question. Pretty much expected from the PYQ analysis, or let's say, the previous trends of UPSC, right? Next question. This is also a pretty direct question we have covered constantly in our topic video lectures as well. A bond whose proceeds are used only to finance or refinance a combination of both environmental and social projects are called what? They are not green bond, they are sustainability bond. Next is, which of the following statements above M1 exchange role in MSMEs financing are correct? Well, this was also one of the most important topics, most expected, because MSME as a concept or as a topic is UPSC's hot favorite. We have already witnessed in all the previous year PYQs, especially the previous year questions of UPSC. Well, let's look at the statement. M1 exchange provides collateral based loans to MSMEs. Well, it is basically the opposite. The word collateral is the key word here. It does not provide collateral based loans to MSME, but it provides free collateral. It provides loans without any collateral. So obviously both the statement goes wrong. Now you'll have to choose between these two. Next is M1 exchange facilitates discounting of invoices and bills of exchange for MSMEs. This is the correct statement. And third is M1 exchange functions as a credit rating agency for MSME is absolutely wrong. So well, the answer is 2. So next is one of the most direct question, in fact, from the fiscal policy chapter, the crowding out effect. This was a very direct question, and the answer here is B. So what best describes crowding out effect is what the question is. Well, it is a situation where government borrowing leads to higher interest rates, which reduces private investment. It is a very direct and the most kind of, I say, this is the one of the most easiest question in the entire economic section. Next is 96. Which of the following statements about insurance in aviation sector is or correct? Well, this was considered, in fact, the most difficult paper. In fact, the difficult kind of a question. Either you know, or you don't know. Well, the first statement goes: aviation hull insurance covers the physical aircraft, including the body, engine, and onboard equipment. Well, the answer, is obviously both one and two. And in fact, even if you were to take a guess, this was a question which could have been possible just by guessing. Because, if you have the knack of solving PYQs, especially by practicing all the PYQs, this was the question which was pretty much doable, at least in the last reiteration. Of course, I'm also underscoring one fact that whenever I say doable, I am not disregarding the fact that the paper was not difficult. So please understand that the paper was absolutely difficult, and most importantly, it was completely absurd. It was completely ambiguous. But still, I'm talking about a ray of hope within the examination hall that every aspirant wanted, which ultimately could have been possible if they had at least practiced PYQs and if they had known UPSC's way of asking question is what my argument is on. So I'm not disregarding the fact that the paper was not difficult. Of course, the paper was absolutely difficult, but however, we are just talking with respect to how certain questions could have been attempted. Okay, yeah, coming back to the question. So the first statement is pretty generalistic statement where it talks about possibilities. It talks about the new insurance, which has been brought in the aviation sector. So possibilities are all of these could be there because aviation hull insurance covers the physical aircraft, including body, engine, onboard equipment. Because obviously, even if you talk about the car insurance or let's say any particular insurance, unless and until you have certain coverage for all the equipments or for all the parts or for all the bodies, like basically you would not go for that insurance. So now this new insurance, especially in the aviation sector, don't you think it would include all of these things? So obviously it matters. So obviously the statement should be correct. Next is under the Montreal Convention adopted in 1999 by over 130 countries, including India, airlines are strictly liable to pay compensation to family nominee of every deceased passenger without requiring the family to prove fault. Well, the answer is correct, both one and two. So this is also a very obvious kind of a statement. Yes, of course, I'm very sure people, I understand your condition, getting the answer or let's say trying to solve the paper in that condition. But still, given the time constraint, given the constraints of attempts and given certain conditions, you definitely had to solve the paper. And probably this was the way that you could have solved. Well, the answer here is both one and two. Next is which of the following statements about crowdfunding is or are correct? So this is also one of the easiest question. Well, the answer here is both one and two. Crowdfunding is solicitation of funds from multiple investors through a web-based platform or social networking site for a specific project. SMEs are able to raise funds at lower cost of capital without undergoing rigorous procedures. So both of these statements are correct. This was also pretty much from the PYQ itself. There was a pattern. So if people who would have analyzed PYQs, I think they would have been possible to solve it. Next question, of course, absolute blunder, absolute absurd, because it is highly impossible that any aspirant would completely memorize all of these different committees and the objectives and organization which was formed under it. Absolute question where nobody should have actually taken any risk. However, the answer is D, which is like which of the, let's go to the question. With reference to different committees in India, consider the following details. So which of the rows are correctly matching? So basically it is 2 and 3, right? Of course, it is absolutely impossible. This was an absolute difficult paper. In fact, it was a difficult question, and it was the blunderous question about asking about all the various committees and all of those things. But however, this is the answer 2 and 4. Sorry, 2 and 4 is the correct answer. Next is consider the following statements about the non-banking financial companies in India. So this is also an easy question, doable question. We have covered extensively about NBFCs even in our classes as well. And pretty much it is a very easy one. The answer is 1 and 4 because the NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits. That is well established. all NBFCs, I mean, all the NBFCs operating in India have to be registered with RBI. Well, that is not the case. Not all NBFCs, certain NBFCs, they don't have to register with RBI. So obviously, second statement means there's two goes. And third one, NBFCs form part of the payment and settlement system and can issue check drawn and so even this statement is absolutely wrong. Even this we have absolutely discussed in the classes with proper flow chart and everything. So third statement goes. So obviously the answer which is left is 1 and 4. Well, let's see all the fourth option also. Deposit insurance facility of deposit taking, or let's say deposit insurance facility of deposit insurance and credit guarantee corporation is not available to all the depositors of deposit taking NBFCs. Well, that is also a correct statement. So the answer here is 1 and 4. So this was pretty much a direct question and an easy question and a static based question which was doable. Next is multidimensional poverty index. So this was also a very straightforward question. MPI is calculated using alkyl phosphatide method. MPI calculated by Niti Aayog has total of 12 indicators. Maternal health and bank account are common indicators in the MPI of Niti Aayog and MPI of United Nations Development Program. Well, the answer is just 1 and 2. Third statement is not correct. Well, that's all for this particular video. Well, economy, as I have already said, of course, of all these questions, at least 6 to 7 questions were possible and were doable, and the rest of the questions were definitely ought to be left. Anyway, I wish all the best for all the aspirants who have attempted this year's paper, and I also pledge all the aspirants that not to worry about I mean, what should be done for the future or for the next attempt. Well, everybody is in a shock, and definitely I feel personally that whatever you have to do, you just have to do the basics. Just stick to fundamentals, stick to UPSC syllabus. Although UPSC is not sticking, at least aspirants, everybody collectively has to stick to the syllabus. And all in all, zyada se zyada, matlab, what might happen is that the cutoff would go down. But however, the aspirants who are sticking to the syllabus will eventually find it fruitful once after they clear the prelims, because ultimately mains mein to matlab they cannot ask anything beyond the syllabus, and whatever you have to study within the syllabus will definitely help in mains.